She slipped from the ridge, one scream from death, until a cowboy's rope caught her mid-fall. But when his hands bled pulling her back, she realized fate had tied them together forever. Like, subscribe, and tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Let's get started. The ridge loomed high against a sky burning red and gold, the last breath of daylight fading into the canyon below. The wind howled through the rocks, carrying with it the scent of dust, pine, and danger. She had been warned not to climb alone, but stubbornness had always been her curse. Her boots slipped against loose gravel, and before she could scream, the earth gave way beneath her. The world tilted and she fell, arms flailing, heart pounding, the sky spinning overhead like a wheel of fire. For a moment she thought it was over. Then the rope snapped tight. The jolt stole her breath, yanking her body to a halt as pain shot through her ribs. The rope bit into her waist, twisting, cutting through her coat. Her eyes fluttered open to see the edge of the cliff far above, the wind roaring in her ears. Panic set in. Her fingers clawed at the rope, legs kicking against the open air. Then she heard a voice. "Hold on," it shouted, rough, deep, steady. She looked up, squinting through the dust, and saw a silhouette, a man leaning over the ridge, muscles straining as he fought to pull her up. A cowboy. His hat was gone, swept away by the wind, but the determination on his face was unmistakable. His boots dug into the dirt, his hands raw from the friction. "Don't move," he called again. She wanted to answer, to tell him she couldn't even if she tried, but her voice broke under the weight of fear. Below her, the canyon stretched endlessly, swallowing the sun in shadow. Above her, the cowboy gritted his teeth, inch by inch hauling her toward him, his jaw clenched with pain and effort. Each second stretched into eternity. The rope creaked, the fibers groaning under the strain. Sweat poured down his temples, his knuckles white as bone. She tried to help, reaching upward, but her body trembled with exhaustion. "Almost there," he grunted, voice shaking. She could see him clearer now. The rough stubble on his jaw, the scar across his cheek, the wild determination in his eyes. He wasn't just pulling her up from a fall. He was fighting fate itself. Her hands finally caught the ledge, fingers digging into the dirt as he reached down and grabbed her wrist with both hands. The moment their skin touched, something electric surged through her, not magic, but the raw pulse of survival, of two lives tied together by chance. He pulled with everything he had left, muscles burning, and finally, with one last heave, she tumbled onto the ridge beside him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The rope lay coiled between them, their breaths heavy and uneven. The sound of their heartbeats filled the silence louder than the wind. She turned her head, her eyes wide and wet. You saved me," she whispered. He sat back on his heels, panting, his chest rising and falling like a stormed sea. "Reckon I did," he said softly, though there was no pride in his tone, only relief. His hands were bleeding, palms torn from the rope. She pushed herself up weakly, wincing as she brushed dirt from her face. "Why were you even here?" she asked, her voice trembling. He glanced toward the horizon, where the sun's last light touched the rocks with gold. "Heard your horse spook near the trail. Figured someone was in trouble." He looked at her again, his eyes softer now. "Didn't figure it'd be this bad." The wind eased, the canyon quieted. She hugged her knees to her chest, trying to steady her breath. "I thought I was dead," she murmured. He didn't reply, just looked at her, really looked. The dirt on her cheeks, the cut above her eyebrow, the fear still fading from her eyes. He saw strength there too, the kind that came from surviving something no one should have. He stood and offered his hand. "You can walk?" She hesitated, then nodded, letting him pull her up. His hand was rough but steady, grounding her in a way she didn't expect. They stood together on the edge of the ridge, looking down at the canyon she had nearly become a part of forever. The rope that had saved her life hung slack in his grasp, frayed but unbroken. "Guess that's what trust feels like," he said quietly. She smiled faintly, brushing hair from her face. "Trust?" she echoed. "I didn't even know your name." He looked at her for a moment, the corner of his mouth turning up. "Name's Wade," she nodded slowly. "I'm Clara." He tipped his hatless head in greeting. "Pleasure's mine, Miss Clara, though I'd prefer meetin' under less dramatic circumstances." Clara laughed weakly, the sound echoing against the rocks. It was the first time she'd felt alive since the fall. The sky above them deepened to twilight, stars beginning to appear, fragile and bright. "You really weren't going to let go, were you?" she asked after a while. Wade shook his head. "Wouldn't have been able to live with myself if I did." He coiled the rope again, slow and methodical, as though it were something sacred. "Funny thing," he said. "Never thought I'd be saving someone's life with this old rope. Used it for cattle more times than I can count." Clara watched him in silence, her heart still racing, not just from fear, but from something unfamiliar, gratitude tangled with awe. "Maybe it was meant to happen," she said softly. "You finding me?" Wade looked at her then, his eyes meeting hers through the dim light. "Maybe so," he said. "Or maybe you just fell into the wrong canyon and I happened to be nearby." She smiled faintly, though her gaze lingered on him. "Either way, thank you," he nodded once. "You're welcome, ma'am." The wind picked up again, cooler now, carrying the scent of rain from the distance. Wade looked toward the horizon, where dark clouds gathered like smoke. "Storm's coming. We better get to cover before it breaks." He offered his hand again, and she took it without hesitation this time. As they walked along the ridge side by side, their shadows stretched long behind them. Two survivors bound by a single rope, and a moment neither would ever forget. That night, when the rain finally came, they found shelter beneath a rocky outcrop. The fire crackled weakly, throwing flickers of orange light on their faces. Clara sat wrapped in his coat, staring into the flames. "If you hadn't been there," she began, but Wade cut her off gently. "Don't dwell on what didn't happen," he said. "You're here. That's all that matters." She looked at him, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "You didn't even know me," she whispered. He smiled, his gaze soft. "Didn't have to." Outside, the wind howled again, but it no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like a song, low and endless, weaving through the night. And as the rain fell softly on the desert, Clara realized that sometimes fate didn't need words or promises. Sometimes it only needed a rope, and someone who refused to let go. The ridge was quiet again, though the silence carried the weight of everything that had just happened. The wind still whispered through the canyons, but now it sounded softer, gentler, as if the land itself had witnessed their struggle and chosen to calm. Wade sat on the rocky ground, breathing hard, his hands raw and bloodied from the rope. Beside him, Clara trembled, the dust clinging to her hair and tears streaking down her face. Neither spoke for a long while. Words felt small compared to what they had just survived. The rope lay between them, frayed, red-stained, sacred. When she finally looked at him, her eyes were wide with something deeper than gratitude, confusion, fear, wonder all tangled together. "You should have let me go," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You could have died." Wade shook his head slowly, his chest still heaving. "Could have," he said simply. "But I didn't." He met her gaze then, steady and certain, and she felt the world tilt again, not with the dizzying spin of falling, but the quiet realization that her life was no longer just her own. He had pulled her from the edge, but in doing so tied himself to her forever. The air between them shimmered with a tension neither could explain. It wasn't romance, not yet, not even trust, but something primal, unspoken. Two souls that had met death and refused to bow. Wade reached for his canteen and handed it to her. "Drink slow," he murmured. "You've been through hell." She obeyed, the water cool and sharp against her dry throat. "You're hurt," she said after a moment, noticing the blood on his palms. He shrugged, wiping them on his jeans. "Ain't nothing. I've had worse from a wild steer." His attempt at humor broke through her fear, and she let out a shaky laugh. The sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the sky in streaks of violet and flame. Wade stood, extending a hand to help her up. "We should move before dark. There's a cave not far from here, safe enough for the night." She hesitated, her legs weak, but his steady gaze gave her courage. She took his hand. His grip was firm, grounding her once again. Step by step they climbed away from the ledge, every sound of the wind reminding her of the fall she'd escaped. And with every glance at the man beside her, she wondered what kind of heart risked everything for a stranger. When they reached the cave, Wade built a small fire from dry twigs and sagebrush. The light flickered against the stone walls, casting shadows that danced like spirits. Clara sat near the entrance, hugging her knees. Her mind replayed the moment she had fallen. The terror, the spinning sky, the burning pain in her ribs. She could still feel the snap of the rope around her waist. Then, without warning, her chest tightened and tears came again, hot and uncontrollable. Wade noticed and moved closer, crouching beside her. "You're safe now," he said quietly. You did good out there. I didn't do anything, she murmured. You did it all. Wade shook his head. You held on. Sometimes that's the hardest part. His words carried a weight that came from experience. From years of facing storms, loss, and loneliness. He looked into the fire, the glow lighting his scarred features. Fell once myself, he said softly. Not from a ridge, but from life, I guess. Took me a while to climb back up. Clara studied him then, realizing there was pain behind his calm, the kind that didn't heal with time. Did someone help you? She asked gently. Wade smiled faintly. No, guess I didn't have a rope back then. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with unspoken understanding. Two people, one saved by a rope, the other saved by purpose. Outside, the wind carried the sound of distant thunder, echoing through the canyon. Clara shivered and pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders. Wade tossed another stick into the fire and leaned back against the cave wall. Get some rest, he said. We'll head down at first light. She nodded, though sleep felt impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the drop below her, the endless fall. But when she looked at him, steady and unshaken, she found a fragile sense of peace. Hours passed. The fire dimmed. Clara stirred, her dreams haunted by the sound of the wind. She woke to find Wade still awake, sitting near the entrance, keeping watch. The storm had broken. Rain pattered softly against the rocks. You're still up, she whispered. He glanced over, eyes weary but alert. Old habits, he said. Can't sleep easy when there's someone under my care. She smiled faintly. You talk like a soldier. He looked away, the firelight catching something old and sorrowful in his eyes. Maybe I was, he murmured. In another life. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the canyon washed clean and glittering with dew. Wade packed his things and coiled the rope carefully as if it were something precious. Clara watched him, her heart tightening. You're really just going to leave after this? She asked. He paused, meeting her gaze. Didn't figure you'd want me hanging around. She shook her head quickly. That's not what I meant. The words stuck in her throat. Gratitude, longing, confusion all tangled together. You saved my life, Wade. I can't just walk away and pretend that doesn't mean something. He smiled, slow and sad. Means plenty, he said. But I didn't do it expecting anything back. He tied the rope to his saddle, then looked at her again, softer now. You want to thank me? Liv, don't waste what you got back. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. And what about you? Who's saving you? The question hung in the air like smoke. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver locket. Dented, weathered, old. Guess I'm still trying to figure that part out, he said quietly. They rode down the trail together, the sun rising behind them. The world below came alive. The scent of wet sage, the glint of water in the distance, the cry of hawks circling overhead. Neither spoke much. Words felt unnecessary. When they reached the valley floor, the path split in two, one leading toward the town, the other toward the open plains. Wade stopped his horse. This is where I leave you, ma'am. Clara turned in her saddle, her chest aching. Will I see you again? He gave a small smile, adjusting his hat. If the wind's kind, maybe. She watched as he rode away, the rope hanging from his saddle like a symbol, a thread that still connected them even across the growing distance. The man who had pulled her from the edge had vanished into the wild, but the feeling he left behind stayed. Not love yet, not exactly, but something deeper. Hope, strength, a reason to breathe again. Years later, when Clara would tell the story of how she fell from the ridge, she never called Wade her savior. She called him her reminder that sometimes in the loneliest moments fate sends a hand instead of a miracle, a rope instead of wings, and that hand, rough and trembling, might just be the one that ties two souls together forever.